A double defeat for the Conservatives last night in Wellingborough and Kingswood, as we were discussing at the top of the show. I'm joined now by the chairman of the Conservative Party, Richard Holden. A very good morning to you. Thanks for joining me. I guess it's not a good morning for you, is it?
Well, it's very disappointing results in both, and I needed to shy away from that, in both Kingswood and Wellingborough. I think one of the most disappointing things for me, though, was the turnout in the by-elections was so significantly down compared to the previous general elections in both seats. And I want to see people actively participating in democracy. I think that shows that we've got a lot to do to get people out there and enthused to vote again, and probably the opposition have a similar challenge.
I mean, clearly the challenge is bigger for you, given these results. I mean, in Wellingborough in particular, the swing is the second biggest of all time in the post-World War II era. 28.5% is worse than Tamworth, worse than Selby and Ainstey. What do you think is going quite so horribly wrong at the moment? Well,
I think we've got to look at both these by-elections and the context in which they happened as well. We had an MP in Kingswood who stood down, and also, obviously, in Wellingborough, we had a parliamentary investigation which led to a recall petition, which led to an MP being forced to stand down as well. Not ideal circumstances for any form of by-election for any party, really. I mean, we saw back in, I think it was 2020 or 2019, 2021, I think, the by-election in Hartlepool, where we saw a Labour MP had been forced to stand down there, and they lost that seat. So the context of individual by-elections, I think, is also important for parties, whoever's having them and whoever's taking part in them as well.
I mean, it's a good attempted spin. It's a 28.5% swing. I don't think it can be explained by the individual context on its own.
Well, I mean, you could look at the difference between the two seats. There's quite a marked difference between the two by-election results. So I think individual context is important to take in each of these.
OK, well, let's step back and look at something that happened in both seats, and that's how well Reform did. 13% in Wellingborough, 10% in Kingswood. What will you do to get those voters back to the Conservatives?
Well, I mean, those voters will come from all sorts of different parties. People might have voted Independent or voted for Conservatives or voted for Labour as well. I think the important thing, both of those, is, like, I remember those by-elections back in the mid-2010s, where we saw the predecessor to Reform, UKIP, getting 50% of the vote in some cases in Clacton and in Rochester and Stroud back in the day. So we're not in that sort of circumstances at the moment. But it's very important that I want to appeal to voters from right across the piece, but particularly, I think we saw in those by-elections, as I mentioned at the start, the turnout was very much down, and it's very clear that turnout was down, particularly amongst people who voted Conservative. So it's really up to us to take the message out to them, to show that clarity of our plan for the future. We've got inflation falling now, but we've got to do more and really highlight why people should be voting Conservative when it comes to the general.
I'm interested you mentioned the 2010s, because quite clearly there was a ploy to get those voters back then, to offer them a referendum on EU membership. I mean, are you suggesting something like that should come? Offer people a referendum on ECHR membership, something like that?
Well, what I was referencing in reference to the 2010s was the fact that actually at the point UKIP were getting 50% plus of the vote. I think what we've seen is something very significantly different to that here in both Kingswood and Wellingborough.
What will you do to get those voters back?
Well, we have to be very clear with them, and I think actually the issues which when I spoke to people who were voting for different parties on the doorstep were very similar, and a lot of them were based around cost of living. They're worried about that. They want to see further falls in inflation. We've seen the Bank of England predicting that inflation will be falling within the year. I want to see interest rates cuts following that. It's pressure on families to do that.
You think the Bank of England should be cutting interest rates?
I think when they can, I think that's what they should do, but obviously that's going to be down to them. But they've shown that inflation is going to be falling. I think when that headroom allows, obviously we want to see that happen. I think on the other side, people have seen those tax cuts hitting their pockets at the start of this year, but I think they want to see that as a direction of travel rather than a one-off. They do accept that obviously we've had to fund support for people during the energy issues we've faced following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the pandemic, but they want to see a different direction of travel now. They appreciate the government stood behind them to support jobs and families and small businesses, but I think they want to see that new lower tax direction of travel now.
I'm interested, though, you're focusing on the economy as the big positive to point to on a day you've lost two by-elections by significant swings, on the morning after it was confirmed that the economy's in recession. I mean, is that really the single biggest positive you can point to?
Well, what I'd say on that is that, look, we've entered a technical recession, as you say. I hope we'll be moving out of that more quickly. One of the issues that we've seen, though, the biggest issue that came up on the doorstep was around cost of living, was around inflation. That's what we've tackled quite a lot already, but we've still got further to go. We've seen inflation drop from 11.1% to 4%, but it's still above that 2% target. Bank of England says we're going to be getting there hopefully within the next few months, and that's what I want to see. Is people really worried about things that are affecting their daily lives, like cost of living, and it's only with that sensible reductions in things like inflation that we can put cash back into more cash into public services as well.
The gist of this interview has been terrible results this morning. What can you do to get voters back? And just to leave on that note, the single thing that you want to focus people's minds on is the economy the day after you fell into recession.
Well, I think the country's fallen into recession. I think one of the things that I want to do is focus on...
Do you not take responsibility for that, as the government that's been in power for 14 years?
Of course, but what I want to do is see... and I also think that when we're facing issues like inflation, that's the number one issue that's been facing families. It's what people come to me in my own constituency surgery about, has been that rising cost of living. Well, we've taken some really tough but difficult decisions to deal with that over the last year or so. We're seeing inflation fall. We need it to go further. But I think on all of those metrics, we're moving in the right direction when it comes to inflation. We've got to go further. And when we've done that, we can see interest rates come down as well, which will be really helpful for working families across the country, allied with those tax cuts. And we've seen a start of that with the national insurance cut from 2% for everybody in work just in January. But we need to go further on that and show a clear direction of travel to the country as well.
Richard Holden, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.